A hush settled over the Imperial War Council as Kirzal stepped forward, his clawed hands tightening into fists. The chamber, a grand hall of polished obsidian and banners of conquered worlds, reeked of arrogance. Generals lounged in their seats, smirks plastered across their faces. The Emperor, draped in gold and black, leaned forward on his throne, eyes gleaming with condescension. Kirzal exhaled slowly, staring at the gathered elite. They wouldn't listen. He already knew that. But he had to try. "Turn back," he said, his voice a growl of barely contained fury. "Withdraw your fleets from Sol. Leave Earth untouched." A ripple of laughter spread through the chamber. A general in ceremonial armor, his crimson sash draped over his broad chest, chuckled. "You expect the Grand Imperium to cower from an unclaimed, undeveloped dirt ball?" He turned to his peers. "I fought in the Kalen Wars. We crushed an empire spanning 10 systems in a single cycle. But you," he jabbed a clawed finger at Kirzal, "you tremble over a primitive species that still uses ballistics?" Kirzal's eyes flickered with old ghosts. His voice dropped lower, controlled but cold. "You don't understand what you're walking into." The Emperor steepled his fingers. "Enlighten us, then." Kirzal inhaled, choosing his words carefully. "I was once a commander of the Varkari Dominion. I fought in wars you've never heard of, against enemies that are nothing but dust beneath your banners. But there is one war that was erased from our records. Buried. It was never spoken of again." The laughter faded, replaced with uneasy silence. Kirzal met the Emperor's gaze, his golden eyes hard as steel. It was against them. The chamber remained still. "We struck first, as we always did. Our warships entered their system unchallenged. Their defenses were lacking. We thought them prey. We were wrong." A lean strategist with pale, sunken eyes scoffed. "A fleet was lost. So what? Kirzal slammed a fist on the war table, the metal buckling beneath his strength. "We did not lose a fleet. We lost a generation." A murmur spread through the chamber. "We underestimated them. Their tactics were erratic, their weapons crude, but they adapted. We bombed their cities. They didn't wail. They didn't plead. They disappeared. They let us think we had one. Then came the counterattack." His voice tightened. "Not a battle. A slaughter. They did not meet us on open fields. There were no banners, no armies. Just shadows, whispers, death. We lost ships to invisible strikes, missiles that came from nowhere, railgun rounds that tore through our strongest hulls. Infantry? Gone. Not taken prisoner, not dead, just gone. Our officers were found with their own weapons buried in their chests. Our supply lines ceased to exist. By the time we realized what was happening, we weren't fighting an enemy. We were being hunted." Silence. A war marshal, his uniform pristine and polished, sneered. "A tragic tale. And yet, your species still exists." Kirzal's lips curled in something that might have been a smile. "Yes. Because we ran. We abandoned the system. We abandoned everything. And even then," his throat tightened, "they followed." He leaned forward. His voice, once thunderous, was now a whisper. "They let us run. They let us think we had escaped. Then, one by one, the remnants of our great fleet, our last hope, vanished. No distress signals. No survivors. A pause. No one speaks of that war because no one survived it. Except me." The Emperor's gaze did not waver. And yet, here you stand. Alive! Kirzal let out a bitter exhale. Because they wanted me alive. He straightened. I was found drifting in the wreckage. The only survivor. They could have killed me, but they didn't. Instead, they sent me back. And when my escape pod's hatch opened, I found a message carved into the hull. His claws tapped against the war table, mimicking the strokes of those chilling words. Do not return. The chamber remained deathly quiet. A younger tactician, brow furrowed, muttered, "This could be useful information." He turned to the Emperor. If they rely on asymmetrical warfare, then perhaps we can. Kirzal shook his head. You don't get it. They're not like us. You're planning a war. They're preparing an extermination. The Emperor leaned back, expression unreadable. He drummed his fingers on his throne's armrest. If they are so powerful, why haven't they expanded? Why haven't they claimed territory? Kirzal's breath hitched. He had asked himself that for years. And the answer had only ever terrified him. They don't need to. They don't want to. Because war isn't conquest for them. It's survival. Every war they fight, they become stronger. Every empire that challenges them dies. The Emperor studied him for a long moment before rising. You have given us much to consider. His voice was measured. But I think you are mistaken. You encountered a rogue colony, at best. You do not understand the scale of the Imperium. He turned to his generals. The invasion proceeds as planned. Kirzal's chest tightened. His warning had failed. Before he left, he turned one last time, voice laced with quiet fury. You think you will crush them. That your warships will blot out their sky and bring them to their knees. You expect them to cower before your might. His claws dug into the war table, metal screeching. They will not kneel. They will not bow. They will burn you. Not because they want to. Because you have forced them to. The Emperor's expression remained impassive. Then let them burn. Kirzal said nothing more. He simply turned and walked away, knowing that in a matter of weeks, the screams of the Imperial forces would drown out the Emperor's last, arrogant words. The Imperial fleet breached Earth's atmosphere with the confidence of conquerors. Their warships, sleek and monstrous, descended in perfect formation, blotting out the sky. Tens of thousands of soldiers deployed in disciplined ranks, weapons gleaming under the pale blue sun of this primitive world. The invasion was set. Humanity would fall within the cycle. High Commander Vorton surveyed the battlefield from his command deck, talons clicking against polished metal. No resistance. No response. Pathetic. His officers nodded, their expressions painted with amusement. They fled, one chuckled. Like all the others before them. The primitives know what's coming. Vorton smirked. They will learn that running does not save them. From his vantage point, he saw his troops spread across the city, boots crushing ancient pavement, armored walkers moving in perfect synchronization. The cityscape stood silent, too silent. No civilians. No defenders. No life. Vorton's smirk faded. Something's wrong. A sudden crack rang out. An Imperial officer standing beside him jerked violently, his helmet bursting into shards. His body collapsed, blood pooling at Vorton's feet. Sniper, a soldier screamed. Another shot. Then another. One by one, officers dropped, not randomly, but targeted. The troops scattered for cover, but the moment they moved, explosions tore through their formations. Where is the enemy? Vorton bellowed, eyes darting across the empty skyline. No response. Only death. Columns of fire erupted from alleyways as hidden artillery rained hell upon their landing zones. War machines that should have been unstoppable collapsed like paper, their operators torn apart before they could even react. Vorton activated his visor's battlefield scanner. No heat signatures. No enemy units detected. It was impossible. They were fighting ghosts. A garbled scream crackled through the comms. They're inside the walkers. The channel cut off. Vorton turned, watching in horror as one of their towering war machines turned against them, its plasma cannon swiveling toward the Imperial ranks. The blast annihilated an entire squad. How? A technician's voice trembled over the comms. They hacked our systems. We've lost control of... Silence. Vorton's command ship trembled violently as an unseen force seized the fleet's communications, jamming their distress signals. Another explosion. Then another. Within minutes, the mighty Imperial vanguard was crumbling. Vorton clenched his fists. Deploy aerial drones. We need eyes. The sky filled with hundreds of them, swift, scanning, searching. For a brief moment, hope returned. Then, one by one, the drones flickered offline. The remaining displays on the command deck showed garbled messages, overwritten code flashing red. Then, a single phrase appeared across every Imperial interface. We see you. Silence gripped the war room. A captain, his face pale beneath his helmet, swallowed hard. Sir, we need to retreat. Vorton snarled. Retreat? Against the species that hasn't even shown itself? We are the Imperium. We do not run. A loud thunk echoed from behind. Everyone froze. The chamber door had been sealed from the outside. Vorton turned, his breath catching in his throat. The lights flickered. The room dimmed. Then, one by one, his officers began to drop. No gunfire. No visible enemy. Just the sickening sound of bodies hitting the floor. Vorton's pulse pounded in his ears. He activated his wrist blade, scanning wildly. Fight me, you cowards, he roared. A whisper, cold and mechanical, drifted through his earpiece. We already have. His vision blurred. His limbs stiffened. His body collapsed. Darkness. Vorton awoke in a nightmare. The command ship was in chaos, alarms blaring, hull breached. His fleet was no longer responding. His captains, once proud warriors, stared blankly into nothing, weapons discarded. His soldiers, the finest the Imperium had to offer, stood in rigid terror, too afraid to move. Something had shattered them. Something had broken them. Vorton staggered to his feet. Status report. No one answered. His ship's comms flickered to life. A transmission. A human voice, calm and controlled, echoed across the bridge. Your forces are finished. Your ships are compromised. Your war is over. Vorton's talons dug into the console. Lies. The voice continued, unfazed. You came here expecting a war. But war isn't what we do. We don't fight like you. We don't follow your rules. We don't play your game. Vorton's hands shook. You're monsters. Laughter, soft, amused. No! We just learned what happens when you let people like you exist for too long. A pause. Now run. The transmission ended. The ship's systems rebooted, just long enough for him to see the battlefield below. thousands of Imperial bodies littered the ruins. His once proud fleet was in retreat, broken beyond recognition. The Imperium, for the first time in history, had been defeated. Vorton collapsed into his chair, breath heavy, heart pounding. A cold realization settled over him. The humans weren't fighting for survival. They had never been fighting at all. They had already won. The silence in the Imperial War Council chamber was absolute. The Emperor sat rigid on his throne, fingers tapping against the cold armrest, his golden eyes locked on the massive war table before him. The holographic display flickered, distorting the images of a burning fleet, a shattered army, and the erased presence of his invasion force on Earth. A single blinking transmission feed remained open, the only surviving link to the disaster below. A broken voice crackled through. "They're everywhere. We can't see them. We can't stop them. They..." A sharp burst of static. Then, silence. The chamber was packed with generals, admirals, and strategists, each one frozen, pale beneath their uniforms. None dared to speak. Then, a hollow breath. The Emperor exhaled slowly, a practiced motion, controlled. Measured. He turned his head slightly. Who survives? A technician, trembling, scanned the final data. "Sir, we have remnants. Scattered. Several ships have broken formation," but he hesitated, then swallowed hard. "The fleet is compromised." The Emperor's fingers stopped tapping. "Compromised?" The technician nodded. "The human forces have infiltrated our command network. They're inside our systems. They see what we see. They hear what we hear." An admiral took an unsteady step forward. "Sire, this is not a battle anymore. It's eradication." The words sent a ripple of fear through the room. The Emperor's gaze lifted. "And our countermeasures?" A pause. Then, another voice. "We lost control of them." Silence. The Emperor leaned back into his throne, his expression unreadable. A deep voice, guttural and hoarse, cut through the tension. "I warned you." Kirzal. The alien war veteran stood at the far end of the chamber, arms crossed, his golden eyes burning with something between anger and grim satisfaction. "You should have listened," he continued, his voice low. "You thought them savages. You thought they would break." He exhaled through gritted teeth. "Instead, you've made them better." A general stepped forward, anger coloring his face. "You think this is the end? You think the Empire will crumble because of one failed invasion? We still hold 1,000 worlds. Our fleet still outnumber them 100 to 1. Kirzal's eyes darkened. "And how many wars have they fought since you first set foot on their world?" The general hesitated. Kirzal took a slow step forward. "Every battle you've waged has only taught them more. You strike, they adapt. You overwhelm, they outmaneuver. You invade, they consume. You do not fight humans. You feed them." A strategist turned to the Emperor. "Your Excellency, we can still retaliate. We must launch a full-scale orbital bombardment. Glass the planet before they..." The Emperor lifted a single hand. The room fell silent. A slow, deliberate command left his lips. "Deploy the Doomsday Protocol." A breathless hush followed. Then, movement, officers scrambled, pressing commands, activating security overrides. Across the chamber, the holoscreens flickered, displaying the ultimate failsafe. A planet killer. A weapon so powerful it could erase a world in minutes. An execution. A final solution. The fleet, what remained of it, received the orders. Warships still intact shifted into position, their colossal cannons tilting toward Earth's surface. Targeting systems recalibrated. Energy cores hummed with death. Kirzal watched it unfold, his chest tightening. He had expected this. He had seen this. And yet, he still felt the cold grip of dread coil in his gut. Because he knew something they did not. The Emperor, standing now, gazed at the screens, his voice calm, detached. Send the final message. A single Imperial transmission was broadcast across all channels, its meaning clear. You fought well. But this is over. For a moment, the Empire believed it had won. Then, the screens flickered. The countdown froze. Targeting systems failed. Missile bays locked shut. The Doomsday Protocol had been hijacked. An alarm rang through the chamber. Officers frantically pressed controls, nothing responded. Security overrides were overridden. The system was no longer theirs. A cold, artificial voice rang through the chamber's speakers. No! The room stilled. The voice was not human. It was their own system, repurposed. Twisted. Controlled. The fleet-wide command link blinked once, and then, new coordinates appeared. The Doomsday weapon was no longer aimed at Earth. It was now locked onto the Empire's own homeworld. A suffocating silence gripped the room. A technician, voice hollow, whispered the words none dared to say aloud. They've turned it against us. The Emperor's jaw clenched. For the first time, he felt it. Not anger. Not defiance. Fear. Another transmission blinked through. This time, it was them. A simple message. No arrogance. No cruelty. Just finality. You wanted war. You never understood what that meant. But you will now. The command triggered itself. The Empire's own weapon fired. The war was over. And the humans had never even left their planet. The Emperor stood in the ruins of his war room, his golden armor dimmed beneath the flickering emergency lights. Smoke curled through the shattered chamber, screens cracked and sparking, their data feeds hijacked. His fleet was in full retreat. His empire was breaking. His world, his throne world, had minutes left before the weapon they had built, the one meant to destroy Earth, would instead erase them. He clenched his fists, his voice a slow, seething whisper. This cannot be happening. Kirzal stood across from him, untouched by the chaos, his expression unreadable. You thought you could end them with a single order. You never understood them. The Emperor's gaze snapped to him, burning with fury. We are the Imperium. We have ruled for millennia. This is not how it ends. A cold chuckle. Kirzal shook his head. And yet, it has. A transmission crackled through the shattered comms. The same voice, their voice. The humans had never shown their faces, never made grand threats. Their words had been calm, simple, precise. This time was no different. You used this weapon because you feared losing. Now it belongs to us. The Emperor braced himself against his throne, hands tightening. We can. No! The single word silenced the room. Your empire ends here. The Emperor's eyes flicked toward the central display, where the Doomsday weapons targeting systems had been locked. The countdown continued its ruthless descent. 2 minutes. He turned sharply. Override it. Shut it down. Disconnect the entire network if you have to. Technicians scrambled, fingers blurring over controls. Nothing responded. One turned, face pale, voice a whisper. Sir, we are no longer in control. The Emperor's breath was slow, measured, but his heart pounded. You are telling me the entire firing sequence is beyond our reach? The technician swallowed hard. It's not ours anymore. A new voice, one they had never heard before. Not a machine. A human. Calm. Detached. You were warned. Kirzal's gaze flickered to the display. 1 minute, 30 seconds. The Emperor drew his blade in a blind fury, metal gleaming in the fractured light. He pointed it at Kirzal. You stand there, watching my empire burn, and you dare to gloat? You think they'll spare you? Kirzal didn't flinch. Spare me? He exhaled, shaking his head. No! They let me live so I could tell you what was coming. But you didn't listen. The Emperor snarled. I can still fight. Kirzal's gaze was pitying. No, you can't. 1 minute. The Emperor's breath was sharp, unsteady. His mind raced through contingencies, calculations, escapes. A single ship. That's all he needed. He turned. Prepare my personal cruiser. I will command from orbit. Another silence. His officers did not move. He gritted his teeth. I gave you an order. No one met his eyes. Then, slowly, a captain straightened, his voice quiet. Sire, there is nowhere left to run. The Emperor's grip on his blade trembled. He spun back to the display, watching as his empire collapsed in real time. His fleet was broken. His army shattered. His world seconds from non-existence. 30 seconds. Kirzal exhaled slowly. Now you know what it feels like. The Emperor's jaw clenched. His mind refused the reality before him. He was the sovereign of 1,000 worlds. The master of conquest. He could not, would not, die here. His teeth bared. They think this will end us? That we will fade? His voice rose, desperate, defiant. I built the greatest civilization the stars have ever known. We will rise again. Kirzal gave him a look that chilled him to the bone. Not this time. 10 seconds. The Emperor turned to his throne, to the shimmering banners of the Imperium, to the dying screens flashing red. His empire, his legacy, everything he had built. 5 seconds. He closed his eyes. A final thought whispered through his mind. Humans do not fight wars. They end them. The countdown reached 0. And then, the Imperium was gone.